Welcome back to Environmental Science 446, 546. The title of this course is Drinking Water and Human Health. Today I'm covering lecture number 14. We're going to continue our discussion on nitrates. I introduced nitrates and the problem with nitrates in lecture 13. Today I'd like to talk about Idaho's database for nitrates and just how widespread are nitrates in groundwater in the state of Idaho, and Idaho is pretty similar to many other states in the country. We have a large database on nitrates in groundwater in Idaho because about between 12 and 15 years ago, the Idaho Farm Bureau conducted a survey. And this survey was a multi-institution project. The Farm Bureau actually collected water samples from farmers in parts of the state, and to assure that there was quality assurance in the sampling, the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, the Idaho Department of Agriculture, and the Idaho Department of Water Resources conducted a monitoring program at the same time, along with local individual health districts. This survey took place over an 11-year period from 1990 all the way to 2000. This survey was done on a county-by-county basis, and during this period of time, a total of 27 counties participated in this program. Consequently, volunteers brought in water samples from their private wells, mainly in agricultural areas of the state, and over 2,700 water samples from wells were collected for this survey. All of these water samples came from private wells. The thing I'd like to mention is people brought in their samples. Their samples were put in a database, and when the samples were analyzed for nitrates, only the homeowner who brought in the sample could identify the number with a particular plot of land. The regulatory agencies knew what the numbers were, but all they knew was that the numbers came from a specified county. So it kept this a pretty anonymous type survey. The survey was started in south central Idaho, and the last county, the 27th county, was Gooding County in the south central part of the state. I think it's important to look at the overall results of this survey. Again, over 2,700 samples were collected. So let's look at the Idaho Farm Bureau survey results. I'm going to start with the table right here, the Idaho Farm Bureau survey results. We're going to have the average concentration of nitrate nitrogen in the water samples and the percent of wells that had the following nitrate nitrogen concentration. I think what's very interesting, of the 2,700 samples that were brought in, and these were from agricultural areas where the aquifers were relatively shallow. There wasn't a lot of difference between the surface of the soil and the water table. We found that wells that contained over 10 parts per million nitrate nitrogen constituted only 6% of the 2,700 samples that came in. An additional 15% of the wells contained nitrate nitrogen values between 5 and 9.9 parts per million. 34% of the 2,700 well samples that came in had nitrate nitrogen values between 2 and 4.9 parts per million. Another 31% of the wells had nitrate nitrogen values between 0.1 and 1.9 parts per million. And then finally, 14% of the wells had undetectable levels of nitrate in the water. From a perspective of a regulatory agency, the numbers tell a pretty good story. The regulatory agency is interested in the number of wells that were above 10 parts per million nitrate nitrogen, the drinking water standard. If you take a look at that, 6% of the wells were above the drinking water standard. That means, conversely, 94% of the wells had nitrate nitrogen values less than 10 parts per million, and consequently, from a human consumption standpoint, you could say that 94% of the wells provided safe drinking water as far as nitrates were concerned. One of the big questions about these survey results is, what is a background level of nitrate? There were some very pristine areas in Idaho that were sampled adjacent to Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park, and they still found 1.5 parts per million nitrate nitrogen. Due to geologic formations and organic matter decomposition, in some pretty pristine areas, you could have nitrates in the well water. So one of the things the state agencies had to decide was, what is a background level of nitrate? What is a nitrate value at which we're not concerned at all, because that could be from natural causes. Finally, the agencies came together and they determined, or they decided, for the purpose of education, that 2.0 was a background value. If nitrate nitrogen values were at 2.0 or higher, there has been some human activity that elevated the nitrate nitrogen levels in that water. If nitrate nitrogen concentrations were between 0 and 1.9 parts per million, that nitrate value could be due to human uses, but also could be due to natural phenomena. As this data was published in local newspapers, I think it's very interesting how people interpreted this data. First of all, the Idaho Farm Bureau wrote an article and had it published in newspapers in the state that basically said 94% of the wells in Idaho are safe as far as nitrate nitrogen is concerned. And based on the MCL for nitrate nitrogen of 10 parts per million, they were entirely correct. Conversely, there was an article that appeared at the same time in one of the major newspapers of the state, whereas an NGO wrote an article, and their article said 86% of the wells in Idaho are contaminated with nitrates. Were they correct? Yes, they were correct too, because only 14% of the wells had no nitrates in them. 86% of the wells had some level of nitrates in them, but we can't determine what's background and what's due to human elevation. So you have the same set of data, and you had two different groups with different agendas completely interpreting this data differently. I'd like to take a little time, not very much time, talking about the sampling program in different parts of the state. First of all, let's look at the northern part of the state. 172 of the 2,700 samples were collected in northern Idaho, and the sampling program only took place in 3 northern Idaho counties, Bonner, Benewah, and Latah County. And based on the wells in those 3 counties, they found that 37% of the wells had no nitrate in them, and only 3% of the wells had more than 10 parts per million nitrate nitrogen. So 97% of the wells in the northern part of the state that were sampled were safe as far as nitrate was concerned. If we move to the mountain counties of Idaho, 212 samples were taken, Custer Butte and Lemhi County, and the results from these 3 mountain counties were very interesting. Only 1% of the samples, or only 2 of the 212 samples, had nitrate nitrogen values above 10 parts per million. Consequently, 98% of the wells could be deemed as safe. 14% of the wells had no nitrates in them. And if you use 2 parts per million as a background level, you can add up the magenta and the green areas, and you would come up with 82% of the wells had no nitrate in them from human-induced activities. If we move to southwestern Idaho, southwestern Idaho, the green counties were the counties that were sampled. That includes Washington, Payette, Gem, Canyon, Ada, Elmore, and Owyhee counties. Over 1,200 samples came out of these counties, out of the prime farmland in these counties in particular. You saw the distribution was about 9% of the wells were above 10 parts per million nitrate nitrogen or didn't meet federal standards. But if you take a look at the magenta and the green, another 41% of the wells had nitrate values that would only be considered background levels. So actually the nitrate nitrogen values were a little bit higher in southwestern Idaho. That's because we have a lot of irrigated agriculture in southwestern Idaho, and a lot of that irrigation agriculture sits not very far above the actual water tables in that part of the state. We move to south central Idaho, we see a different story. The agricultural counties of Twin Falls, Cassia, Minidoka, and Jerome counties were sampled in the Farm Bureau survey. That's 541 samples. 4% of the wells had more than 10 parts per million nitrate nitrogen. You add the magenta and the green together, 21% of the wells had less than background nitrate nitrogen levels. And then finally we go to the southeastern part of the state. The green shaded counties again were sampled. 480 well samples came out of this portion of the state, and we see that only about 3% of the wells were above the federal drinking water standard, and the magenta and green areas were 61%, where there is no indication that human activity has caused nitrate introduction into the aquifers. So I thought that the study showed a lot. The study showed that overall, most of our wells in the state have acceptable levels of nitrate in there. Only 6% of the wells sampled by the Farm Bureau exceeded the nitrate nitrogen standard. Now, if we look at the state of Idaho had an ambient groundwater monitoring program, and they sampled wells across the state, and their findings came up with the fact that only 3% of the wells they sampled exceeded the standard. So actually the Farm Bureau survey had a lot more wells on a percentage basis that exceeded federal standards than the state program. That's probably because the Farm Bureau standard concentrated on wells in rural irrigated farming areas. The state groundwater program, also using their data, said that about 33% of the wells in the state have been impacted. Humans have impacted nitrate levels. They would consider it an impacted well any time they ran into a well that had more than 2 parts per million nitrate nitrogen. And that means we're going to spend a little bit of time and talking about nitrate impacted aquifers. So we'll be talking about aquifers that have more than 2 parts per million nitrate nitrogen in them. The state and researchers were also interested in determining where the nitrate came from. Remember I mentioned that there were, in the last lecture, that there were 6 areas that nitrate comes from? Well, in Idaho, they can do some radio tracer work and actually find out where those nitrates came from. Their research program showed that about 60% of the nitrate in groundwater in the state comes from using nitrogen fertilizers. Another 22% of the nitrogen of the wells in the state were impacted primarily from animal waste. Another 11% were primarily impacted by legumes, things like alfalfa. Atmospheric nitrogen could account for about 5% of the nitrate in wells. And septic systems, very low, about 2%. So the state found out what they really wanted to find out. They found out that agriculture, fertilizers, manures, and legumes collectively resulted in about 93% of the nitrate in groundwater in the state of Idaho. Consequently, you have a publication before you called Idaho's Nitrate Areas of Concern. And depending on the publication you look at, there's somewhere between 22 and 33 nitrate areas of concern in the state. The reason why that number varies quite a bit is a lot of the nitrate areas of concern were consolidated. If they were small areas and they sat adjacent to another, they were actually combined into a single area. So in Idaho, we currently have 25 what I would call nitrate areas of concern. The commonality in these 25 areas of concern include, first of all, over half the wells that have been sampled above the particular aquifer have nitrate nitrogen values above 2 parts per million. And more than 25% of the wells have nitrate nitrogen levels above 5 parts per million. So remember, we're considering wells with less than 2.0 parts per million nitrate as background concentrations. So what we're doing is we're looking at wells that have more than 2 parts per million and saying they are impacted by humans. To be a nitrate area of concern, over half the wells have to be above 2 parts per million nitrate nitrogen, and 25% of the wells are above the 5 part per million nitrate nitrogen level. Now these levels are still below the federal drinking water standard of 10, but they signify wells that have elevated levels of nitrate. And if we take a look at the state of Idaho, and we look at where those 25 to 33 areas are, we can see that they concentrate along the Snake River Plain in the southern part of the state, and that's where our major irrigated agriculture is. We apply nitrogen fertilizers, we apply irrigation water. If we over-irrigate, the nitrate leaches into the groundwater. So most of the areas that have high nitrates are in the southern part of the state along the Snake River Plain. Only 3 areas are in the northern part of the state. If we look at some of the areas of the state, if we look in southeastern Idaho, we can see that we have the area of Ashton is a nitrate area of concern. We've got small aquifers spread across southeastern Idaho that meet this criteria of over half the wells having 2.0 parts per million nitrate nitrogen, and over 25% of the wells above 5 parts per million nitrate nitrogen. Now, if I zoom in this area, and let's look right here. You can see this is in Jefferson County. This is what we call the Mud Lake nitrate area of concern. This is a geographic area where there's an aquifer underneath, and Mud Lake fits this 25 area, nitrate area of concern category, because if you look on the table of your handout in the back where you see the Mud Lake aquifer, you can see that over half the wells have above 2 parts per million, and over a quarter of the wells are above 5 parts per million. If we take a look at the Mud Lake area a little bit closer, this nitrate area of concern, the Mud Lake nitrate area of concern, actually 62% of the wells that were sampled were above 2 parts per million nitrate nitrogen, and 56% of the wells were above that 5.0 value. So both of those criteria were met, so the Mud Lake aquifer becomes one of the 25 to 33 nitrate areas of concern in the state of Idaho. Actually, 6% of the wells in the Mud Lake area were actually above the federal standard of 10 parts per million. So that's considered serious. So basically the state says we need to try and make sure that we don't continue to elevate nitrate levels in those aquifers. And we'll talk about how we do that a little bit later in the lecture. Stay in southeastern Idaho. We have an area called the Ashton area right here. This nitrate area of concern. That's one where we have pretty high levels of nitrate in that aquifer right there. So if we look at nitrate areas of concern in southeastern Idaho, Mud Lake covers 36,000 acres. The St. Anthony area, another 6,600 acres. The Ashton area is a bigger aquifer, 34,000 acres. And basically these are all the colored areas on your map. The Teton area, over 106,000 acres. And the other Teton aquifer, over 10,000 acres. And if we just wanted to take a look at a few other maps, we'll blow them up just a little bit. In the southeastern part of the state, Fort Hall, Arbon Valley. This is an aquifer in southeastern Idaho that is a nitrate area of concern around the town of Soda Springs. And again, you can follow along looking at your handout. I'm just showing you some maps. The Cache Valley area in the extreme southeastern part of the state is also a nitrate area of concern because over half the wells are above 2 parts per million and 25% of the wells are above 5 parts per million. So again, if we look at southeastern Idaho and look at the nitrate areas of concern in there, the Cache Valley, almost 130,000 acres. Other southeast aquifers, another 300,000 acres. The Portneuf Black Cliffs Aquifer, 2,500 acres. The Pocatello Chubbuck Aquifer, another 10,000 acres. The Fort Hall Aquifer, which is on the Native American reservation, the Shobannock, 32,000 acres. So if we add all those numbers up here in the southeastern part of the state, there's over 695,000 acres of land that geographically fall within the nitrate areas of concern. Within this 690,000 acres of land, 77,000 people call the area home. So this has an impact on the people living in southeastern Idaho. Okay, let's move to south central Idaho. Here we have the counties of Twin Falls, Cassia, Minidoka County, Jerome County, Lincoln County, Gooding County. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 of the major aquifers of concern here. If we blow this up and look at the Twin Falls area, you can see the town of Twin Falls, Kimberly, Hanson's just outside, all the way up to Hollister, west to Buell. This is all an aquifer where the nitrate nitrogen levels are higher than 2 parts, that 50% of the aquifers are higher than 2 parts per million, and 25% are higher than 5 parts per million. A pretty big geographic area and an area that's very, very important for agriculture within the state. We go to the north, and we're in Cassia County, Minidoka County up here. You can see the area south of Burley, the area around the Snake River, Hayburg, and Rupert. All this is in a nitrate area of concern that has been consolidated into just a few areas, areas 16 and 17 on the map you saw a few minutes ago. So there's quite a bit of land in south central Idaho that would fall in a nitrate area of concern. For example, there's 538,000 acres of land that fall in nitrate areas of concern in south and central Idaho. Within this 538,000 acres of land, we have over 85,000 people that live here. So 77,000 live in nitrate areas of concern in southeastern Idaho. Another 85,000 live in nitrate areas of concern in south central Idaho. Well, let's move west. Let's go to southwestern Idaho. When we go to southwestern Idaho, you can see there's a lot of red here. We've got aquifers in Elmore County, in western Ada County, taking up much of Canyon County, a little bit of Owyhee County, south of the Snake River. We see some aquifers in Payette County that are red, and of course one in Washington County. The nitrate areas of concern aquifers occupy 435,000 acres of land in southwestern Idaho. But what's even more important is that 323,000 people live on top of these aquifers. So that brings our total closer to 500,000 people living on aquifers that are considered nitrate areas of concern in the state. If we go north, in the northern part of the state, which extends all the way north to Canada, we didn't have any aquifers of concern north of Latah County. We have 3 small aquifers. Collectively, they cover about 223,000 acres of land, but only 2,100 people live on top of those aquifers. So if we take a look at all the people that live in the state of Idaho on top of these nitrate areas of concern, we have a lot of people. We have 500,000 people, but most of those people live in southwestern Idaho, that are in nitrate areas of concern, with about 17% in south central, 16% in southeast, and only 1% living in the northern part of the state. If we look at the acreage distribution of where the nitrate areas of concern are, you can see acreage distribution is biggest in the southeast, but the population density isn't very great on top of those aquifers. 28% of the acreage is in south central Idaho, 23% in southwestern Idaho, and 12% of the acreage is in the northern part of the state. I guess the big bottom line question is, so what? What are the implications? Let's start with mild implications to severe implications. If you live in a nitrate area of concern, there should be special management practices undertaken to ensure that nitrate levels do not continue to rise in those aquifers. So you could start out very mildly by providing an educational program to the people that live in those areas, particularly people that use nitrogen fertilizers. Try and educate these people to voluntarily use their nitrogen fertilizers better, since remember, over 60% of all the nitrate in aquifers comes from fertilizers. That's a mild thing to do. Maybe you could encourage people to manage their nitrogen better on their agricultural land, to use less, maybe better time their nitrogen application by providing some cost share money. Let people try things out and provide them with a little bit of money to try these good practices. If the nitrate levels continue to go up, then you move to nutrient management plans, requiring people to show how they are going to fertilize their crops, and their fertilization regime has to be justified by science. Nitrate levels continue to go up, and then you require pesticide management plans also. So if you live above an aquifer that doesn't have a lot of nitrate in the groundwater, you do something simple like BMP education. However, half the wells are above 2 parts per million and a quarter of the wells are above 5 parts per million. You need to do more severe management, such as these nutrient and pesticide management plans. You could say that nutrient management plans are, go to the state of Maryland, for example. Maryland is a state that surrounds the Chesapeake Bay. Maryland has gone pretty far. They've gone to a system where they require nutrient management plans of all homeowners of farms that have agriculture receipts in excess of $2,500 a year. And when we talk about a nutrient management plan, the plan includes, what are you doing with all the manures that are generated on your land? What are you doing with the solid waste that you generate on your land? You have to have a plan for disposing of these safely so they do not get into the water. You have to have a plan for the use of your fertilizers. Fertilizer use has to match crop growth. You can't over-apply nutrients without justifying it. And the state of Maryland requires people on these small farms with receipts of over $2,500 to update their plan every 3 years. Now, Maryland's kind of extreme because Maryland borders the Chesapeake Bay, and the Chesapeake Bay is the most productive estuary in North America that has lost a lot of its productivity because we put nutrients in the water. In Idaho, there's an encouragement of dairies to have nutrient management plans. There's nutrient management plans for people that have CAFOs. A CAFO is a confined animal feeding operation. So right now, dairies have to have nutrient management plans in the state of Idaho. So do confined animal feeding operations. Right now, there's no plans to have nutrient management plans for people that only apply fertilizers to their land. Well, I've talked about implications of nitrates in water, but remember, nitrates are also just an indicator of what other things could be in the water. So when we talk about plants, there are also implications for plant protection. Okay, again, BMP education, encouraging people to use integrated pest management, meaning only to go out, determine what pests are in the field, and then based on what's there, match the pesticide that will kill the pests and do the least amount of harm to the environment. Then, of course, cost shares might be in a stage where we have more pesticide contamination in water. Then maybe nutrient management plans under more severe cases where you'd also have to take into account integrated pest management. And then finally, a combined nutrient pest management plan. In Idaho, here's our current strategies. They're similar to other states. Right now in Idaho, if we have aquifers that look like we have nitrate values in them that are higher than background levels, higher than 2 parts per million nitrate nitrogen, we encourage education of the public, farm public, homeowners, everybody, about best management practices to keep nitrogen out of the groundwater. In Idaho, best management practice education is carried out by the University of Idaho, by the Idaho Soil Conservation Commission, and local soil and water conservation districts. In addition to regular BMP education, the Idaho State Department of Agriculture has instituted pesticide state management plans. The ISDA also have rules for backflow prevention standards, and backflow is when you use a hose to take water and put it into a pump, or put it into a container that will have a pesticide. A backflow prevents the water from being sucked backwards back into the clean drinking water system. So we have those type of things. And also, if you want to use pesticides in Idaho, you have to be licensed, which means you have to have so many hours of education. The state can also come in and randomly inspect farms and premises of people that use chemicals. And of course, there are training programs for the general public, for farmers, for merchants, for people that handle chemicals that, if misused, could get into the aquifer. If we look at the national level, the USDA has some programs that farmers and rural people can take advantage of to improve their use of nutrients and chemicals, nitrates and other chemicals. We have the Agricultural Conservation Program, and we have cost sharing where we will give farmers a little bit of money to try the latest and the best practices that use these chemicals but protect them from getting into the environment or into water supplies. The Department of Environmental Quality in Idaho has the authority to do things based on the Clean Water Act, the provision 319 of the Clean Water Act, and there's a groundwater section of the Clean Water Act. Remember, we talked about groundwater source protection in the Safe Drinking Water Act. The law gives the states authorities to have these programs to protect our aquifers. So our current strategies, if we take a look at the State Department of Agriculture, the ISDA, the federal agency EPA, and the state agency, the Department of Environmental Quality, there's a lot of permits for things that are designed to protect groundwater. Normally you think this is just bureaucratic stuff, but all of these provisions are designed to protect groundwater. We have a wastewater land application permits. If, let's say, you have a food processing plant and you have wastewater that's loaded with parts of plants that people have grown, and they want to spray this on land, you have to have a wastewater permit to ensure that these wastes that contain nitrates are not over put on land they're not put on land at too high of rates, which would cause leaching and the introduction of nitrates into the aquifers. We have permits and regulations on how animal waste has to be disposed of. We have regulations for our septic system. If you live in a rural area, you take care of your wastewater by having an individual septic system. There are regulations on how a septic system is built, and there are recommendations that that septic system needs to be maintained. The local health districts actually do most of the work there. In cities, we have a stormwater management program where water that runs off the streets during rainstorms goes through a series of processes to minimize potential damage to water. Nitrates have become really important across the country. 10 years ago, we were concerned about surface water. We were concerned about what was called TMDLs, total maximum daily loads of sediments and other things. We've kind of bypassed the TMDLs now, and we're very concerned about nitrates because there is a health relationship between humans, or between infants and nitrates. Idaho's nitrate area of concern will have an impact on agricultural practices. Areas that live above aquifers with high rates of nitrates in their aquifers will find that landowners are restricted with some of the things they can do. And because nitrates are an indicator of other chemicals that could be in the water, these nitrate area of concerns, the handout you have where you see those, they may also have an impact on how we protect plants from diseases and insects and weeds. So basically, if you take a look at your map of the state of Idaho and you see those red areas, these are nitrate areas of concern. And someday, people living in those red areas are more likely to face more regulations or are more limited on how and when they can apply chemicals. Of those 25 to 33 areas, there are 3 especially difficult areas that the state has targeted, and that's where the state is concentrating their efforts on protecting groundwater from nitrates. That includes Washington County, the Weiser area in southwestern Idaho, because nitrate nitrogen values are very high compared to the rest of the state. It would include Twin Falls County, where we generally have pretty high nitrate nitrogen levels. And in southeastern Idaho, in the Ashton area, we also have very high nitrate levels in the aquifers. So the state has really picked these 3 nitrate areas of concerns out as areas that they would really like to concentrate and really see if we can do something to stop nitrate levels increasing. These nitrate areas of concern and these nitrate maps, you'll see them across the country in different states. What I think that is really important about this is that if you take a look at a nitrate area of concern in Idaho, you're only talking about 3 to 10% of the wells being above the federal standard. But you're talking about 75% of the wells having nitrate levels above background. The purpose is proactive. Let's prevent the nitrate levels from creeping up further so that someday that water will not be safe for drinking. So it's a very proactive approach. Thank you for your attention. And when we come back, we'll move into microbes.